she opened the door and she was like, "Oh, welcome, come in." And the moment she opened the door, 30 bullets were shot into her chest.
I would want to ask the Saudi diplomat, Abdullah Muahami, in his New York Times interview today, he was posted in the New York Times, never mentioned the Saudi attacks that have so exacerbated suffering in Yemen.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown in over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. Today, more of the Tree of Life program about Palestinian refugees. Then, part of a presentation about the problem of coal ash in Puerto Rico. And then ending with a look at a demonstration in Washington, D.C. against the ever-continuing Saudi-U.S. slaughter in Yemen. Last week, Khawla Hammad talked about what drove Palestinians from her village to flee to Lebanon in '48. This week, an account of the killing of her children in Lebanon during the '82 Israeli invasion. Also, Amena Elashkar talks about the lack of rights to work and to own property of Palestinians inside of Lebanon.
Now, during the Israeli invasion to Beirut or of Beirut,
يعني حستي أنا بالذات غير العالم كله.
I went through too much, unlike many other people. 2 of my daughters were killed.
وأخته لجوز بنتي.
And another member of my family.
وابنها وبنت بنتها وابن بنتها 7.
3 of my grandchildren also. The story was when my daughter's mother-in-law died. She needs a moment basically because this part is so hard for her to tell.
That was the 1982.
Yeah, yes. That's when her 2 daughters died and her son also. So this basically is really hard for her to just say it. This was during the 1982 Israeli invasion. The Israeli army first invaded Tyre, which is a city to the north, or in the south of Lebanon, sorry. I think we're not going to be able to tell this story. I'm really sorry, but she's not able to say it. I can summarize this for you guys. So basically what happened was in 1982 when the Israeli army reached Lebanon, she had a daughter and she was not living inside the refugee camps. And this daughter had a funeral. Her mother-in-law died, and people were the family who was in her daughter's room or house, they were all invited to a dinner in their neighbor's house, which was next to her daughter's house. So her daughter refused to go because she said people are coming and they're paying condolences for the deceased woman, so we cannot just simply leave the house. So why don't all the men go and the woman can stay in the house? And they agreed on that. The woman her daughter was there and another daughter, she was only 13 years old. And just out of a sudden, they hear the door knocking, and her daughter thinks that it's someone coming to visit. So she went there and she opened the door and she was like, "Oh, welcome, come in." And the moment she opened the door, 30 bullets were shot into her chest, and she died right away. And then the army continued into the house and they just shot everybody. They massacred the whole family. There were 12 people inside the house, and there were kids. There were 2 babies, 9 months, 5 months. There was a kid who was only 3 years old. There was also a Lebanese family there paying condolences and stuff like that. Everybody just died, except for one kid who just managed to hide in a corner of the room, and she lost many of her family members this way. So this is the story, and it's really, she's getting hard time to tell it, just say it each time. So we're sorry, and please forgive her.
نشكرهم اللي سمعونا.
And she thanks you so much for listening to her. Thank you. So, Palestinians now live in diaspora. We have refugee camps in many countries around Palestine, so we're gonna know how they're living right now. Excuse me. So first thing you have to know, we have refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and we also have refugee camps in West Bank and in Gaza. Not many people know that we have refugees in Gaza and in the West Bank. So, but mainly I come from Lebanon, from the refugee camps in Lebanon. So that's why I'm going to tell you about the conditions of Palestinians in Lebanon, and because the Palestinians live the most miserable life in Lebanon. First thing you have to know is we have 12 refugee camps in Lebanon, and we have 15 Palestinian gatherings. They are unofficial gatherings. So they are small refugee camps, but the UNRWA does not recognize them, so they don't offer them any services. And also the Lebanese government treat them as illegal people, just occupying some land. So they're not also refugees to the Lebanese government. This is Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp. Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp is the biggest refugee camp in Lebanon. And it's not that big actually. It is only 1 square mile. That's its area. And we have 100,000 refugees living in that tiny area. And because it's the biggest refugee area, refugee camp, we call it the capital of diaspora. And then this is Burj al-Barajni refugee camp. That's where I live. And it's a little bit smaller than Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp. It's third of a square mile. And we have 50,000 refugees living inside Burj al-Barajni refugee camp. So, as you may have noticed from Musa's stories, even after the Palestinians were forced to leave Palestine, they were ethnically cleansed by the paramilitary Zionist groups. They also were not left alone even while they were in Lebanon. And they actually invaded Lebanon or Beirut because they wanted to get rid of the Palestinians there. This photo you see here is for what we used to know as Nabatiya refugee camp. That's part of it. Like now, Nabatiya refugee camp does not exist anymore. It was destroyed by the Israeli army back in the 1974. Then this is a photo of Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp, which was destroyed twice by the Israeli army. This is al-Baddawi refugee camp, which was targeted by the Israeli phosphoric bombs in 1982, resulting of the killing of 125 Palestinian refugees. And we also have Burj al-Shamali refugee camp, which was also targeted by the Israeli army in 1982. And that's not it. We also have Sabra and Shatila massacre. As I said, the Israeli army invaded Beirut because they wanted to get rid of the PLO fighters in Lebanon. So the PLO fighters had some kind of agreement with the Israeli army. They said, okay, you can leave, the Israelis told them, you can leave Lebanon, you can leave Beirut, and we can also leave Beirut. And the U.S. government would guarantee the safety of Palestinian civilians inside the camps. And that's how the U.S. government guaranteed the safety of the Palestinians inside the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. On September 16, 1982, all the Palestinian fighters left to the neighboring countries, the Arab countries. And the same night, the Israeli army came and they sieged the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. They did not allow anybody to leave those camps, and they did not allow anybody to go into those camps except for a group of militias who started to enter the camp, and they started butchering and slaughtering the Palestinians who were just civilians, women, old people, children. 3,500 Palestinian and also Lebanese were killed during this massacre that continued for 3 consecutive nights. Nobody was allowed to go into there or see what was happening, actually. At that time, you guys have to know that even at night, those militias were constantly killing people by the help of the Israeli light bombs. You know, they were lighting the refugee camps for them in order to kill them. So, but now we're in 2017. The last war Lebanon witnessed was in 2006. And now we don't have any wars, but how the Palestinians are living inside the refugee camps. Well, they're not living a very good life. Why? Because Palestinians in Lebanon do not have any civil rights. They don't have any human rights. They're not treated as humans, actually. Palestinians there don't have the right to work. They're not allowed to work in 72 professions. You cannot be, like, if your dream was to become a doctor, just forget about it. You cannot be an engineer. You cannot be, I'm a translator. I cannot work as a translator. You cannot be a journalist. You cannot be basically anything. Also, Palestinians in Lebanon are not allowed to own properties outside the camps. So you guys, you're Americans or US citizens, you can go to Lebanon and own as much property as you want, and nobody's going to stop you from that. But if a Palestinian wanted to do so, he's not allowed to do it. Why is that? Because in 2001, the Lebanese government issued a decree that stated all Palestinians, refugees, are not allowed to own any properties in Lebanon. And if a Palestinian refugee had already owned something or property outside the camp before the issuance of this decree, after his death, the property goes to, guess who? To the Lebanese government, not to his family members. And then, in 2012, the Lebanese government issued a new decree, which stated that Palestinians are not allowed to build any more houses inside the camps. So that's why we had those checkpoints on the entrances of the camps, because the Lebanese army does not allow any building material into the camps. We also have a very, very limited health or medical access to the Lebanese facilities. We're not allowed to Lebanese government schools also. So as you may notice, we don't have any basic human rights in Lebanon. Why the Lebanese government is doing so? It's because they say they are afraid. They are afraid that the international community would force them to solve the refugee crisis, the Palestinian refugee crisis, by simply giving us the Lebanese citizenship, which is something the Lebanese government does not want, and we do not want as well. So, what is the only solution? What is the solution, actually, for all the problems that the Palestinians are going through? What's the solution for, ending the refugee status, ending the stateless status? We're stateless. We don't have any citizenships right now. So what is it? It's the right of return. The only solution that the Palestinians accept, and we do not negotiate, is the right of return. And that's why we're here. That's why we're telling you and sharing with you all those stories, to tell you that the Palestinians, after 70 years in refuge, we still want to return to our lands and to our properties back in Palestine. And thank you so much.
Now to a meeting to discuss the problem of a byproduct of burning coal ash, the dumping of coal ash in Puerto Rico. It was scheduled before the recent devastating hurricane.
And so Penuelas, I knew folks that were working on the issue personally that were out there, and so it was very concrete, it was very clear that this was happening, and it was very clear that it was a decision by the United States, the EPA, to allow it to happen. Right? And so that was something that we knew we could tackle directly. We could find the people that were responsible, mobilize Puerto Ricans to do it, and we began that path, and that's what this event is there. And so then, of course, the hurricane happened, and so the first thing that I thought is, if you have a 10-story tall pile of toxic waste in 4 different cities around the island, what happens to those 10-story tall piles of toxic waste when a hurricane hits it? Right? And so immediately, like, there are immediate needs. We need food and water, but it is clear that long-term we need environmental justice for Puerto Rico, or we're going to be dealing with this forever. And so that's
going to the issue of coal ash, right? Why is coal ash a problem? Rosalind, if you could press the sidebar there. You know, coal ash contains toxic metals, right? Many of them. And I'm no scientist, I'm no science expert, but like aluminum, arsenic, boron, chloride, chromium, fluoride, lead, lithium, sulfate, etc. They can all be found in coal ash, right? And its coal combustion residuals contaminate the local environment, especially water and air, right? The most basic things that we need, water and air. Right? And when we talk about this environmental struggle, right, when we're talking about that in relation to Puerto Rico, we have to understand that that's been going on for decades, arguably centuries, right? And it's directly tied to the anti-colonial struggle of Puerto Rico, right? I feel that they're synonymous. The environmental and anti-colonial struggle are hand in hand, okay? And this is obviously a threat to the environment. It's a threat to public health, right? People who live near coal plants and coal ash are more likely to face respiratory illnesses and many other problems. And it's important to understand this isn't just a Puerto Rico thing, right? Coal ash, coal power, that's a global phenomenon that's been plaguing humanity, okay? You know, I pick out Dominican Republic specifically because when we talk about AES, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute, that's the company responsible for the coal ash dumping in Puerto Rico. They operated in the Dominican Republic, okay? And the coal ash was being exported from Puerto Rico originally to the Dominican Republic. All right, specifically Arroyo Barril in Samana, which is on the northern coast of the Dominican Republic. And you know, this picture comes from a news coverage of the issue in the Dominican Republic, where kids were being born with birth defects, without limbs, right? Residents were facing issues of respiratory illnesses, higher rates of cancer, etc. And this is a picture of the coal ash in the Dominican Republic. And environmental groups, community leaders, politicians, they sued AES. And they actually, there was a settlement for, I think, $6 million, and the coal ash stopped. The dumping stopped because of that. And there was issues with the settlement. I don't know too much about that. But, you know, the $6 million was a slap on the wrist for the negative effects that this had to public health and the environment, right? Because here this goes polluting the water, right? The rivers, right? And there's actually a short documentary on this. I think you could probably find it on YouTube, where people in this community talk about how they had these clean rivers growing up, and now it's like you can't even go in them, right? Next slide, please. So here's a map of beautiful Puerto Rico, right? And the coal ash dumping is taking place in a variety of different towns, but specifically it's centered in Guayama, where the headquarters of AES is, Arroyo, Salinas, Peñuelas over here, Guayanilla, Humacao. Okay, so you find them prominently on the southern coast of Puerto Rico, right? So that's just giving you a visual of the island, and it's important to understand that historically, you know, the South has been subject to the exploitation of land as well as labor. So we'll continue with that. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of the mountain of ash. Literally a mountain of ash, right? So imagine that in your backyard, right? There are people who've complained about this ash appearing on their doorstep, literally, in their house, right? I saw an interview with a lady where she's saying, I sweep every day, and there's coal ash in my house, right? And this is obviously affecting directly those folks who live in and around the communities where these landfills are, but it's also affecting the wider population as well, okay? And now we had a Category 5 hurricane go through Puerto Rico, ravage every town in Puerto Rico. I can only imagine how this looks now, right? So this is already being spread in the air and in the water. And I think Hilda might have a picture of this in her presentation of how it looks now. But just imagine that being spread all over. And then the issue of landfills in Puerto Rico. All right, the issue of landfills in Puerto Rico is you have most landfills, a majority of the landfills that you find in Puerto Rico are overflowing. They're over capacity. They don't meet the regulations of environmental standards here, right? So now with this hurricane, not only do you have the issue with the coal ash dumping and that in landfills, but you have just general landfills that are overflowing with toxic waste, with toxic material, right? With toxic garbage that mix with rainwater. They create just more toxic mess. And now you see all this flooding going on, right? Everybody's seen these images of the flooding taking place. You could just imagine what that's doing for the environment. So we are literally living in, we were already living in an environmentally catastrophic island, and that's just being multiplied by 10, by 100, who knows? I feel like we won't really know the ramifications of this hurricane for a while in regards to many things, especially the environment. Next slide, please. And then the movement to stop the coal ash dumping, right? It has, picked up over the years, but it's really been going on for some time now, right? And so here I just have some images of people rising up saying, we do not want this in our community. We do not want this on our island. This is an effect to our public health. This is a disgrace that this is being allowed by the government for corporate profits, right? Next slide, please. And they've set up encampments in Peñuelas, in Guayama, to basically try to stop the dumping of this coal ash. But it's important to keep in mind that the police, the authorities have implemented a lot of state repression, have, these trucks deliver with hundreds of police to basically intimidate protesters and the encampment, to basically literally push through these trucks so they can go about their business.
More about the situation next week. We close with a bit of street theater in Washington, D.C. to remember a Saudi massacre, that of October 8th of 2016.
In bombing roadways and buses and hospitals for Médecins Sans Frontières, hospitals bombed. Why did they never mention this? I would want to ask the Saudi diplomat, Abdullah Muahami, in his New York Times interview today, he was posted in the New York Times, never mentioned the Saudi attacks that have so exacerbated suffering in Yemen. Expressed sorrow over those who died from cholera, but never told about the terrible bombings, even of funerals. And so today we remember October 8th, 1 year ago, close to 1 year ago, when the funeral of Mr. Ali al-Rawishan was bombed. Can you join with me in imagining that terrible day? Because we won't see it covered on CNN. We won't hear dignitaries speaking about it. So imagine that you're crowding into a hall, and in that hall there are many mourners, and all of you are edgy and frightened, because at this point the United Arab Emirates and the Yemeni government have developed a network of secret prisons where people suffer from extreme torture and even U.S. interrogations. Here in a country where people are targeted by the most sophisticated weaponry, and they're often being bombed by people who get refueling from the United States military, sophisticated militaries, and then maybe less sophisticated, but the Saudi government is hiring Sudanese military to work their way up the coast in the most hideous fighting, taking over Yemeni cities. And this very seldom reaches anyone, and you begin to feel, facing cholera and starvation in your country and almost no infrastructure, you begin to feel as though there's nowhere to turn and nowhere to hide, and you're crowded into the funeral building, and all of a sudden a projectile, a terrible bomb, rips through the building.
The Saudis first denied that they did it, but there's no denying because they're the only ones who are flying the planes. And then they admitted it and said it had been a mistake. And they said, we'll have a commission that will investigate what happened. Well, a year later, the Saudis are still bombing, are still targeting civilians.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.